At first glance, NATO looks like a relic of the Cold War, a military alliance built to hold the line against Soviet aggression. But beneath the diplomatic handshakes, war games, and public declarations of unity, there lies a different kind of machine. A machine powered not just by tanks and treaties, but by contracts, capital, and corporate ambition. Because NATO doesn't just defend nations, it defends profits. It doesn't just organize war exercises, it organizes demand for weapons, defense systems, cybersecurity, and private innovation. And in doing so, it fuels one of the most powerful and profitable industries on Earth: the global defense economy. With no standing army of its own, no borders to protect, and no currency to print, NATO has quietly become a trillion-dollar empire. Not by fighting wars, but by preparing for them forever. The threat never ends, the spending never stops, and the business never dies. This is the untold story of how NATO transformed from a military alliance into a corporate engine, where peacekeeping meets profit, and where war has become the most sustainable business of the 21st century. When NATO was founded in 1949, it was sold to the public as a protective shield, an alliance forged to stand united against a common enemy. But behind closed doors, it was something else entirely: a long-term investment. The founding members weren't just aligning militaries, they were aligning economies. In the aftermath of World War II, the arms industry was already booming. Military contracts had rebuilt devastated manufacturing sectors across Europe and America, and NATO offered the perfect justification to keep that economic engine running indefinitely. From the very beginning, NATO wasn't just about protecting territory, it was about protecting an industry. Defense contractors knew it, politicians knew it, and over the decades, that quiet understanding became an unspoken policy. If you want peace, prepare for endless procurement. Fast forward to today, and NATO's collective military spending exceeds $1.3 trillion a year, over half of all global defense expenditures. But this isn't just spending for the sake of security. It's spending that shapes markets, secures political alliances, and dictates where innovation happens and who profits from it. Every decision NATO makes, from the joint operations to capability standards, ripples across boardrooms and balance sheets. When NATO declares a new military priority, it doesn't just shift strategy, it creates demand. And when that demand hits the market, the beneficiaries are rarely soldiers or civilians, they're shareholders. In reality, NATO has become the world's most effective demand generator. It doesn't sell weapons, it doesn't build tanks, but its influence ensures that billions are spent on both, year after year, budget after budget. And those billions don't disappear into thin air. They go to the corporations behind the scenes, defense giants whose fortunes rise and fall, not on the battlefield victories, but on strategic alignment with NATO priorities. This alliance doesn't just move armies, it moves markets. And while world leaders shake hands and promise unity, corporate executives quietly secure the contracts that keep the entire empire in motion. Buried deep within NATO's founding framework is a number, small enough to seem insignificant, but powerful enough to reshape national budgets. 2%. That's the target NATO recommends every member nation spend on defense. It's not legally binding, it's not enforced by law, but in the world of geopolitics, it might as well be gospel. The idea is simple: security requires commitment, and commitment has a price tag. But over the years, this 2% target has evolved into something far more than a guidance. It's become a political weapon, an economic engine, and a public performance metric all in one. For struggling economies, it's a burden. For defense contractors, it's a promise. In 2014, following the Russian annexation of Crimea, NATO doubled down on the 2% goal, urging all member nations to hit the mark by 2024. At the time, only 3 countries met the threshold. Today, over a dozen do, and more are racing to catch up. Not because it makes strategic sense for all of them, but because failure to comply can mean international embarrassment, reduced influence, or even threats from powerful allies. But here's what's never questioned: where does that money go? When a country like Poland, Estonia, or Germany increases defense spending to meet the 2% requirement, they don't build everything in-house. They go shopping, and the shopping list is long. Fighter jets, drones, cybersecurity platforms, surveillance systems, tactical vehicles, satellite capabilities. Most of it comes from American, British, and European defense giants. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, BAE Systems, Rheinmetall. These companies don't just build weapons, they build influence. They have lobbyists in every major capital, relationships with NATO committees, and decades of experience translating global tension into guaranteed revenue. The 2% mandate ensures that defense budgets stay inflated, regardless of whether a country is under immediate threat. It also creates a kind of arms race, not just between nations, but between political parties eager to look strong, tough, and loyal to NATO ideals. This isn't budgeting, it's signaling, and the signal is clear. NATO expects loyalty, and loyalty comes with financial cost. Whether that cost translates into real security is another question entirely. But for defense contractors, it hardly matters. The mandate guarantees a flow of money that's remarkably resilient. It doesn't depend on war. It doesn't need public approval. It's policy-backed demand on autopilot, driven by fear, sealed by diplomacy, and funded by taxpayers. And once that money enters the system, it rarely comes back. It becomes research, prototypes, lobbying, and eventually profitable exports. In the end, the 2% rule doesn't just defend nations, it defends a trillion-dollar business model. If NATO is the architect of global defense policy, then the world's largest arms manufacturers are the builders, and business is booming. Behind every speech about unity, every summit about deterrence, there's a flurry of quiet details and billion-dollar contracts, feeding the lifeblood of a system that never sleeps. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Thales, and BAE Systems don't just supply NATO countries, they depend on NATO to survive, and NATO in turn depends on them to maintain military superiority. This isn't just a partnership, it's a marketplace, and it's far more lucrative than most people realize. Consider the F-35 fighter jet, a program so massive and complex, it involves over a dozen NATO countries. Produced by Lockheed Martin, the F-35 is the most expensive weapons system in history, projected to cost over $1 trillion over its lifetime. It's not just a plane, it's an ecosystem. Logistics, parts, maintenance, upgrades, and training, all designed to ensure dependency. Once a country buys in, it can't back out, and that's by design. Across Europe, similar deals unfold constantly. Germany purchases missile systems from the US, Poland upgrades tanks with Israeli tech, Romania installs American-made radar arrays. Every sale is justified as strategic alignment, but in reality, it's business disguised as policy. These manufacturers aren't passive suppliers. They actively lobby NATO governments, fund research think tanks, and shape procurement standards. In Washington alone, defense companies spent over $120 million on lobbying in a single year. And much of that lobbying is targeted not at military officials, but on the policymakers who vote on national defense budgets tied directly to NATO obligations. It doesn't end there. NATO holds annual defense exhibitions and industry forums where military leaders, government officials, and private corporations mingle in hotel ballrooms, secure facilities, and classified briefings. These are the modern bazaars of war, where new threats become new opportunities, and new technologies promise new frontiers for profit. Even emerging defense tech, AI warfare, autonomous drones, space surveillance, is being rolled out through joint ventures, public-private partnerships, and government-backed accelerators. The NATO Innovation Fund, launched with over €1 billion in capital, is now investing in cutting-edge startups with clear military applications. The message is simple: if it can be weaponized, it can be monetized. This is not some rogue ecosystem hiding in the shadows. It is the system. NATO isn't just a defense shield, it's a curated marketplace for the arms industry. And while politicians preach cooperation and deterrence, executives quietly close deals worth more than the GDP of some member nations. In this playground, peace is not the priority. procurement is. War is no longer a necessity for profit. In the NATO system, the mere possibility of war is enough. In fact, it may even be better, because actual conflict brings risk, public scrutiny, unpredictable costs, and political fallout. But readiness is clean, predictable, and profitable. Every year, NATO runs dozens of joint exercises across land, sea, air, cyberspace, and now even space. These simulations, like Defender Europe, Cold Response, or Steadfast Noon, mobilize thousands of troops, tanks, ships, jets, and drones. The public sees cooperation. The markets see consumption. Fuel gets burned, parts get replaced, equipment gets upgraded, and behind every maneuver is a supply chain that stretches across the globe. Logistics companies, arms dealers, tech contractors, and private security consultants all cashing in on a perpetual state of preparation. But readiness isn't just physical, it's ideological. Member states are expected to stay interoperable, a NATO buzzword, and essentially means compatible with the alliance's preferred hardware, software, communication systems, and doctrines. That compatibility doesn't come cheap. If a country wants to keep up, it must constantly modernize its arsenal to meet NATO standards. Outdated Soviet-era tanks, scrap them. Buy NATO-compatible armor. Legacy radar, replace it with networked NATO systems. Every upgrade creates new contracts. Every contract strengthens the industrial base. It's an infinite loop, where staying prepared means staying in business. For defense contractors, this is the sweet spot. No bloodshed, no backlash, just endless incentives to innovate, sell, and expand. Countries spend billions not to fight, but to demonstrate that they're ready. Because in the NATO world, unreadiness is seen as weakness, and weakness has consequences. Even military intelligence benefits from this logic. As new threats are identified, real or perceived, they generate new areas for investment. Cybersecurity, disinformation countermeasures, missile defense, space-based surveillance, all of them require tools, systems, and specialists, most of which are developed and sold by private firms under NATO's guidance. And so, peace becomes a stage for performance, readiness becomes the product, and the fear of instability becomes the most effective marketing campaign ever created. NATO doesn't need a war to sustain itself. It just needs the idea of war. That's what keeps the gears turning, the budgets rising, and the contracts flowing. Because in this empire, peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the constant anticipation of it. Security is often portrayed as a moral duty, a government's obligation to protect its people, its borders, its way of life. But within the framework of NATO, security becomes something else entirely. It becomes a commodity, a premium asset, a membership with benefits. And like all high-value assets, it comes with a price. For countries on the periphery of global power, nations like Latvia, Bulgaria, or North Macedonia, NATO memberships is more than a military alliance. It's an economic lifeline. Joining NATO signals to the world that a country is stable, trustworthy, protected, and that signal attracts money. Foreign investors, multinational corporations, and global lenders don't just look at GDP or political polls, they look at security ratings. NATO membership boosts those ratings. It reduces perceived risk, and in today's interconnected markets, reduced risk equals increased capital. This is the hidden business of security, the transformation of political allegiance into financial credibility. A country that joins NATO can expect not just military cooperation, but economic uplift. Real estate prices stabilize, currency valuations strengthen, international aid flows more freely, defense budgets rise, and with them, defense imports. It's not coincidence, it's structural design. NATO also provides strategic cover for controversial economic policies. Massive infrastructure deals like port expansions or airport upgrades often get greenlit under the pretense of dual-use military logistics. Roads are widened, railways modernized, telecommunications upgraded, all under the guise of strategic readiness. But in reality, these upgrades often benefit private contractors, logistics firms, and global supply chains more than soldiers on the ground. Then there's the revolving door of influence. Generals retire and join the boards of defense corporations. Diplomats leave office and become consultants for security firms. NATO contractors sponsor conferences, policy forums, and even academic research. The boundaries blur between defense policy and economic lobbying until they're indistinguishable. And yet this system persists because it delivers results. Countries feel safer, investors feel reassured, politicians can point to rising defense budgets as proof of strength. But the real winners are the companies behind the scenes. Those who have learned to sell peace not as an outcome, but as a subscription service, renewed annually, guaranteed by fear, and paid for by every taxpayer inside the alliance. In this model, security isn't something you achieve, it's something you rent, and NATO is the landlord. In the past, war technology was developed behind closed doors, in classified labs, military bases, and government-funded think tanks. But in today's world, the front lines of innovation have shifted. They're now found in startups, venture capital firms, and university research labs, and NATO knows it. Rather than just reacting to technological change, NATO has begun actively shaping it by reinvesting in the private sector itself. In 2023, the alliance launched the NATO Innovation Fund, a €1 billion venture capital engine designed to do one thing: scout, fund, and weaponize emerging technologies. The fund isn't just throwing money at defense contractors. It's targeting deep tech, startups working on artificial intelligence, quantum computing, space surveillance, biotechnology, and autonomous systems. These are the building blocks of future warfare, and NATO wants first dibs. But it's not just about military advantage, it's about economic leverage. By investing in these companies early, NATO isn't just preparing for future threats, it's controlling future markets. A startup that receives NATO funding instantly gains credibility, visibility, and access to a guaranteed customer base. Procurement deals follow, private investment flows in, valuations skyrocket, and soon what started as a two-person lab experiment becomes a government-certified defense supplier with million-dollar contracts and geopolitical influence. This system is accelerated by Diana, a defense innovation accelerator for the North Atlantic, a NATO initiative that connects entrepreneurs with military needs. It's a matchmaking service between war planners and Silicon Valley, and it's changing the game. No longer is defense technology solely about tanks and missiles. It's about algorithms that can predict enemy movements, sensors that detect cyber intrusions in milliseconds, satellites that can spy on troops' formations from orbit in real time. These technologies are built by private companies, scaled with government funds, and absorbed into NATO's operational pipeline. And just like that, a new economy is born. But with innovation comes dependency. Once NATO integrates a piece of private tech into its infrastructure, it becomes locked in. Upgrades, support, customization, they all flow through the original vendor, and that vendor, now backed by government money, becomes virtually untouchable in the marketplace. The innovation pipeline is no longer separate from the defense economy. It is the defense economy. And NATO, once merely a consumer of technology, is now its most powerful investor, curator, and distributor. This is not about protecting borders. It's about building a future where conflict is managed not just by generals, but by engineers, and where the lines between national defense and private profit vanish completely. From the outside, NATO appears bulletproof, an alliance built on unity, fortified by diplomacy, and armed to the teeth with the latest technology. But beneath the polished speeches and parade drills lies a truth that rarely surfaces in official reports. Someone always foots the bill. That someone is never the defense contractor. It's not the lobbyist or the think tank analysts. It's not the private investor banking on a space warfare startup. The price is paid by the citizens of NATO countries, quietly, gradually, and perpetually. Every time a government meets the 2% GDP target, it diverts funds away from somewhere else. Schools, hospitals, infrastructure, social welfare. These are the invisible casualties of a system that prioritizes strategic alignment over domestic investment. It's rarely framed that way, of course. Defense is marketed as safety, as patriotism, as necessity. But the opportunity cost is real, and it compounds over generations. Meanwhile, procurement waste continues largely unchallenged. Failed weapons systems, delayed technology, corruption scandals, projects that go billions over budget without delivering what was promised. The contractors are rarely punished. The taxpayers always are. Then there's the emotional toll, the sense of perpetual unease, the normalization of militarization, the psychological cost of being constantly told that danger is always one step away. Because fear is good for business, it just isn't good for people. For NATO member states that can afford to play the game, the economic burden is heavy. For those that can't, the cost is sovereignty. Smaller nations bend policy to fit NATO guidelines. They restructure budgets, reorient their economies, and even deepen their reliance on foreign weapons and foreign security. In doing so, they surrender not just their military independence, but their political flexibility. All of this is justified in the name of peace, but the peace that NATO offers is conditional. It's gated behind spending thresholds, policy compliance, and supply chain loyalty. And while that system may indeed deter war, it does not come cheap. The irony is that an organization created to protect democracy now helps concentrate wealth and power in the hands of few. Defense CEOs, shareholders, and political elites who have mastered the business of war without ever stepping onto a battlefield. The empire NATO built doesn't run on conquest, it runs on contracts. Its victories aren't marked by territory gained, but by revenue secured, and its legacy may not be a safer world, but a more profitable one. In the old world, empires were built through fire, through innovation, colonization, and the ruthless pursuit of territory. Their power was measured in land, their legacy etched in blood. But NATO rewrote the playbook. It proved that an empire doesn't need to conquer to control. It only needs to influence what nations fear and what they spend. With no flag, no standing army, and no direct profit margins, NATO became one of the most powerful economic forces in modern history. It engineered a system where permanent readiness replaces permanent war, where the illusion of threat is more profitable than the reality of peace, and where defense is not a shield, but a business model. The world it helped shape is one where alliances are markets, deterrence is currency, and security is the most valuable subscription on Earth. Behind the diplomacy and doctrine, behind the unity slogans and joint operations, NATO's greatest achievement wasn't just keeping the peace, it was turning peace into a product. And now, that product is worth over $1 trillion a year. The question isn't whether it works. The question is who owns it, who profits from it, and how long can it last? Because in a world where war has become a business, the business will always need something to fear. If you found this eye-opening, subscribe now for more deep dives into the empires shaping our world, from money and power to war and influence. This is Empire Secrets, where we expose the business behind the headlines. Your desire, your empire.